Sisyphus is one of the most iconic punished in Greek mythology. A morose king, he was damned to a fate of futile, repetitive labor, pushing his boulder up the hill every day of his sad life, only to watch it come tumbling down moments before reaching the top on the other side. But it makes many Americans feel worse to know that there are many philosophers and artists alike who identify the labor force of today with Sisyphus. Longfellow, in the poem Little Prayers to St. Sisyphus, venerates St. Sisyphus, the patron of the sine wave. He implores that we, the laborious American workforce, offer up our change and beg St. Sisyphus to pray for us, the workers with wheels beyond counting, with boulders beyond pushing, with tasks beyond completing. We, throughout history, have been spoon-fed ideals of work ethic and competition. In fact, in Nixon's Labor Day address in '71, we Americans are called to this inner drive. Nixon asserts that labor is good in itself, that a man at work becomes a better man by the virtue of working. But is it not Sisyphus' punishment simply labor as corrector? Are we becoming a better man by the virtue of working? But fear not, laborer, for there is one philosopher who gives a much more chipper fate to Sisyphus and all of us. Camus, in the 1995 essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, does concede that the laborer of today is the ultimate manifestation of the Sisyphus archetype, but also asserts that this is not such a bad thing. Camus believes that the struggle up the mountain, that the labor itself, is enough to fill Sisyphus and all of our hearts. Camus leaves Sisyphus at the bottom of the hill, looking at the work he has yet to complete and fulfill him happy. Then why aren't we happy at work? Studies done annually by the Conference Board, as referenced in Adams, have found job dissatisfaction rates in over half of Americans. While this was at an all-time low during the 2010 recession, and while this rate is slowly repairing, it's still astronomically high, a full 13% more dissatisfied than the first time this study was done in '87. So this is where we can introduce the Job Diagnostic Survey, an inventory devised by Harvard Professor Hackman and University of Illinois Professor Oldham. Their survey was meant to diagnose jobs and to analyze the effects that they had on employees. This survey is composed of 5 core job dimensions which can be evaluated by employees and outside observers like myself. I administered the survey to our favorite mythical center and found his NPS. 1. Skill variety, the degree to which a job requires a variety of activities. Sisyphus' work is simple labor involving just his strength. For this, he earns a 1 out of 7. 2. Task identity, the degree to which the job requires completion of a whole and identifiable piece of work with a visible outcome. That would be the one core dimension that Sisyphus actually meets the mark on. When he makes his descent down the hill, he sees the manifestation of his labor. So for that, he has a visible representation of his work and can easily identify his task. He earns a 5 out of 7, losing but 2 points because he never sees his work finished, rolling it to the other side. 3. Task significance, the degree to which the job has a substantial impact on the lives of others. Now, Sisyphus' hell is a personal one. He's the one character that actually references meeting him in the afterlife as Odysseus himself. Sisyphus does teach Odysseus a minor lesson, but it's wholly insignificant. So for that, he had a minor impact on the lives of others. Sisyphus scores a 2 out of 7. 4. Autonomy, the degree to which the job provides substantial freedom, independence, and discretion. Sisyphus' work is autonomous in that it is independent, but not in that it is optional. His work is punishment and therefore cannot wholly qualify. For this, he earns a 3 out of 7. 5. Feedback, the degree to which carrying out the work results in the employee obtaining direct information about the effectiveness of their performance. Now, Sisyphus' only feedback is that he is unsuccessful and fated to redo his work indefinitely. For that, this is not positive feedback, for it offers no possibility for growth. For this, he earns a 1 out of 7. If we put all of these values back into the MPS equation, Sisyphus' score calculates to just 8. If a perfect job were ever possible with 7s across the board, the maximum would be 323. Sisyphus scores 2% of the maximum potential. Hackman and Oldham prove in their research that the higher the MPS, the better employee is able to attain what they call critical psychological states. For the sake of my research, I've narrowed down to one specific state, experienced meaningfulness, that Sisyphus is unable to attain. A multitude of research is being done that analyzes the link between work meaningfulness and psychological stability. For example, research done by Arnold at the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology attempted to analyze the relationship between transformational leadership and psychological stability. But what they discovered was that it is not leadership itself that leads to stability, but instead meaningfulness often derived from leadership that leads to psychological benefits. Similarly, work done by Britt at U.S. Military Academy studied personality hardiness in her soldiers and how that personality dimension led to psychological benefits. They also found that the link between hardiness and psychological benefits can come from any number of traits, but work meaningfulness was the common link. Lots of other research is discovering similar results. It's not certain aspects of one's personality, be it leadership or hardiness, that can lead to psychological well-being, but instead it is meaningful work that can come from any number of personality traits that end up culminating in psychological benefits. So if we know that Sisyphus and the American worker archetyped in the myth both have pitiful NPSs, and if a low NPS leads to low experienced meaningfulness, we can then assume that the Sisyphus myth character and the American worker are, in a sense, wholly unstable. So to Camus I return. I too leave Sisyphus at the bottom of the hill, but I say we must imagine him and all of us unhappy. But we Americans are damning ourselves to this fate. Research by Ubel and Comerford at Duke University, as cited in Green, have proven that even when we are presented with fulfilling but difficult tasks, we often opt for the easier, less fulfilling task anyways. So if we choose this grim fate for ourselves, shouldn't we be able to liberate ourselves? If we remember the harsh rhetoric exemplified in Nixon's speech aforementioned, what we hear is a pushing of American ideals. Instilled in us at youth is that sloth is a sin of capital vice. So we become the sad, sinful Sisyphus when we are reminded constantly that we must be working for the sake of work, living for the sake of work. Maybe that's why we choose the easy jobs, because they are less exhausting but meet our moral need to be working, even if psychologically detrimental. So what do we do about this? The first option that Camus offers us implicitly is that of passivity. Camus reminds us that the fate of Sisyphus is only tragic to one who assumes him unfulfilled in the moments at which Sisyphus is conscious of his fate. While Camus later will assert that Sisyphus' fate is not tragic at all, to which I say it is, he is right. We in Sisyphus could let ourselves slip into unconscious bliss, ignoring the gloomy eternity. But how grim would this be? Are we, the supposedly hardy Americans, to let our minds enter disarray and rejection? We do have other choices. We must consciously choose our work. It's actually quite simple in concept, just difficult in execution. We must reject the notion of work for work's sake, menial labor that is completely unfulfilling for ourselves. When and only when we reject meaningless work will we stop living for work's sake and instead begin working for life's sake. And it will be difficult to rid the world of the meaningless jobs. There will be some afraid of losing work. There are some that are too comfortable at their meaningless jobs. And there will be some jobs that left abandoned will go undone at first. Thankfully, the meaningless jobs are the ones already being automated or at risk of becoming so soon. That's why they're unfulfilling, because they could be easily taken over by a robot and will eventually. Instead of fighting this automation, we should instead embrace it. Leave the detrimental jobs and employ ourselves in work that is meaningful exclusively. It is not work itself that is correcting and pure, only meaningful work that is. This is the goal, to leave the American worker as far away from the unfulfilled Sisyphus as possible. So I too leave the American worker at the hill, but I leave him at the top. I leave the American worker looking down at their life of meaningful work they've completed, happy. Thank you.